Hello, so welcome to the next section. So we want to look at how to calculate overtime pay. How to calculate overtime pay. So the overtime wage rate is calculated by multiplying the hourly wage by 1.5 times. Let's look at an example. Assuming that your hourly wage is $20 and your total overtime hours is 10 hours. So to calculate your overtime wage, first of all, what you need to do is you multiply your hourly wage by how much you are supposed to be paid for an hour overtime. So hourly wage, as mentioned, is $20, and for every worker, if you work overtime, you are supposed to be paid 1.5 times your normal salary, or 1.5. So the $20 times 1.5, which is $30, that gives you your overtime wage, and this is just for an hour. So to get the total overtime wage, you multiply your overtime wage you calculated by the total overtime hours. So we got 30 as our overtime wage multiplied by the total overtime hours. Our total overtime hours, as you can see here, was 10 hours. So 30 times 10. Let me go over. So this is what you do. Assuming that you have an hourly wage of $20 and you have worked overtime for 10 hours. To calculate your overtime wage, how much you are supposed to be paid for this $10, first of all, you multiply your hourly wage by the how much you are supposed to be paid for every hour overtime. And as I explained, for every hour you are supposed to be paid 1.5 or 1.5 times your normal salary. So it is your hourly wage times 1.5. 20 times 1.5, which gives you 30. But to know how much you are supposed to be paid for the 10 hours you've worked, that is your total overtime wage. You multiply your overtime wage, which you've computed here, by the total overtime hours you worked, that is the 10 hours. So 30 times 10 gives you $300. Normally the overtime wage is higher than what you would have earned on a normal day if you had worked, because you are being paid 1.5 times your hours of work. Okay, so the next thing we'll look at is paid overtime. Paid overtime. The first thing is that subject to subsections 2 and 3, where a worker in an undertaking works after the hours of work fixed by the rules of that undertaking, the additional hours done shall be regarded as overtime work. So an undertaking is a document that has an agreement, the worker and the employer. The worker has promised that this is what I will do, these are the conditions of the employment. Yes, so subject to the subsection 2 and 3 of the Labor Act 651, where a worker in an undertaking works after the hours of work fixed by the rules of that undertaking. So the undertaking has fixed some hours of work, but the worker works even beyond those hours of work. The additional hours done shall be regarded as overtime. So in an undertaking, it could be that the undertaking specifies that the worker will work only 4 hours a day, not even 8 hours. So if the worker works 6 hours, the additional 2 hours is considered as overtime. Okay, the next thing is a worker in any such undertaking may not be required to do overtime work unless that undertaking has fixed rates of pay for overtime work. A worker in any such undertaking may not be required to do overtime work unless the undertaking has fixed rates of pay for overtime work. So unless the undertaking states that if you work overtime, this is how much we'll pay you. If the undertaking does not state that, the worker is not obliged to do any overtime work. And the third thing is, a worker shall not be compelled or shall not be forced to do overtime work except for undertakings or enterprises whose very nature require overtime in order to be viable. There are some companies and there are some enterprises without overtime the company cannot stand. So for such a company, it is stated in the undertaking already before you are employed. Also for such a company, you can be compelled to do overtime work. There are some factories, and if you are a factory hand, there are some factories you are supposed to do overtime work for the factory to survive. And the second is, you only be compelled to do overtime if the work if that particular work you do at that moment is subject to emergency that requires that you, the worker, engage in overtime. For instance, you are a nurse, you are off duty, but there is an emergency situation and you need to attend to it before you, or maybe you are done working, but there is an emergency situation you need to attend to before you go home. Because you are working beyond your hours of work, it is overtime, and you must be forced to do it, all because maybe you neglecting it, someone will die, or if it's a threat to life or property. So under these conditions will a worker be compelled to do overtime. I'll continue in the next lecture. Thank you. Bye.